And the Oscar goes to...
And the Oscar goes to...
And the Oscar goes to...
I don't care!
What's next?
What's next?
What's next?
Don't you want to hear what's next?
What are you going to do next?
What's next for you?
What's next?
What's next?
Okay, so what's next?
I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of After the Gold. And this week we're going to be looking at the highest grossing movie of all time that also happens to be a Best Picture follow-up. I'm talking about the 2009 James Cameron epic sensation, Avatar. But if you're new to the series, what I do every single week is discuss a Best Picture follow-up movie. So a director has to win Best Picture, and then what's their next movie? What happened to it? Did they have an increase in budget? What happened at the Oscars? Do a little bit of kind of the historical context and the production history in the first half of the video. And then the second half, talk about my thoughts on the film, talk about its modern day reputation, because we're talking about, a movie 15 years old now, more than that. And sometimes we talk about kind of older movies. I'm always interested not only in the movie that wins Best Picture, but the follow-up. What did they decide to do once they had all of that kind of power and juice and kind of blank check status once they won Best Picture? We've been having a lot of fun with this series, doing some really consequential movies, and once again we are doing another consequential movie here in Avatar. And as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. I know a lot of people have seen this movie. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the movie generally, and then also just the general consensus of Avatar, because I found its understanding of modern day reputation a little bit difficult, and had some difficulty also removing my kind of opinion and appreciation for the film from maybe its more modern reputation. I'd love to hear that in the comments down below. But jumping into things, starting up at the top here, I want to talk about the production history and where we were and why this movie decided to get made, because it is a fascinating movie within James Cameron's career. But before we go forward, we have to go backward. Let's talk about 1997's Titanic. Quick backstory on that. This was a huge bet for James Cameron. He was kind of like a Steven Spielberg in that this was his seventh movie. He made a lot of big blockbusters, action-type movies, was considered, a technically proficient director, but wasn't really in that kind of a prestige status. And then he says, okay, I want to be in that prestige status. Let's make a more serious drama, romance. Let's make Titanic. They make the movie, and production issue after production issue happens. It ends up being the most expensive movie ever made. People thought it was going to be a huge disaster, and the opposite happens. Not only is it a huge critical success and the Oscars, it also is a huge commercial success, going on to become the highest grossing movie of all time at the time, and still is in the kind of the top 5 of that list. And then on the Oscar side too, wins 11 Oscars, which is the most any movie has ever won, tied with Lord of the Rings. And then also had the most amount of nominations ever, with a total of 14. So this was a huge deal. Not only was it the biggest movie ever, it was also a Best Picture winner and a Best Director winner. It's crazy to think that this movie that everyone kind of doubted ended up being what I would argue the biggest success of all time in movie history. Not only commercially, but also critically, but also launched the stars in the movie star status, really, of Kate Winslet and Leonardo DiCaprio, two major stars that we still have today. So it is a critical movie in movie history. But what's fascinating about what he decides to do with this follow-up, Avatar, is that he decides to wait. He makes 3 movies in the 90s, really in a 15-year period when he started. There was 7 movies in 15 years. So essentially every other year, James Cameron was making a movie. And then between Titanic and Avatar, there's 12 years. So you have a 15-year gap of 7 movies, and then a 12-year gap of only 1 movie. And people doubted him again. There were some, production issues, and just in the case of how long this movie took to make, Cameron was making, just waiting for a lot of the technology to catch up with him, trying to do this groundbreaking kind of 3D CGI motion capture technology that the Lord of the Rings films really helped pioneer and introduce. And what's crazy still is that people doubted him again. This movie took 12 years to make. They gave him all this money. What's with the CGI? It's not as good as maybe we thought it would be. What's with these blue people? And then the movie comes out, and What's crazy is that he tops himself. Avatar goes on to beat Titanic as the highest grossing movie of all time. A crazy sequence of events. Usually the Best Picture follow-ups we talk about are made within a couple years and then don't do as well at the Oscars, but are maybe, secret hidden gems. But Avatar was a huge phenomenon. Once again, people didn't, believe in James Cameron. They bet against him, and he proved everyone wrong, and it was a huge success after the fact. Doesn't go on to win Best Picture. Probably had the best chance. We talked about Lawrence of Arabia with David Lean and how that kind of happened. James Cameron would be similar to a David Lean, but almost it would be if you think of Lawrence of Arabia, it would almost be if Avatar would to win Best Picture, but interestingly, it doesn't win Best Picture. We talked about this on the Zero Dark 30 episode. It loses to The Hurt Locker. I think a kind of consequential shift in the Academy, just as a demarcation point of, instead of rewarding the biggest movie of all time, which they did with Titanic 12 years earlier, instead they go with the kind of smaller independent movie with The Hurt Locker. In 1997, if they were awarded, let's say, Good Will Hunting for Best Picture, it wouldn't show a shift in the Oscars. But I do think there's a kind of direct comparison point where you have Titanic in 97, it wins Best Picture because, in part, it's the biggest movie of the year. Then you have 2009, Avatar, biggest movie of the year, doesn't win Best Picture. They go with the smaller movie in The Hurt Locker, and you see how the kind of Academy's taste has shifted over the years, even today, where more recently Anora, a $6 million truly independent movie, wins Best Picture. It is a bit of a shift in the Academy's taste. And then in terms of just its modern day reputation, I'm a little bit split, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. Because on one hand, I go, it's kind of odd that this is the highest grossing movie of all time, and I believe number 3 or number 4 on the list is its sequel, which came another, 10 years after, or 12 years after that. And I remember even a couple of years ago, people thought, are people still fans of Avatar? Are they going to show up? And it became a huge success, and $2 billion movie, and everyone went to see it. And yet its cultural footprint is a little bit more difficult to understand, because I think a lot of us would agree that there are more fans maybe online vocally of franchises like Marvel or Harry Potter or The Lord of the Rings or Star Wars. I don't know if Avatar's in that class. A lot of it because they have, generations of fans, which helps too. But there's not necessarily a lot of memes of Avatar. There was a thing online where, people would say it's the highest grossing movie of all time, and yet you couldn't, name the characters. I think that's kind of changed recently in modern years, just because you have the sequel coming out later this year, or the third movie coming out later this year. You already had the sequel be released. I think there's certain things, the fact that the sequel did so well, there clearly is demand and there is appreciation and love for this franchise. There is the kind of world, the land there at Disney World, which is, acclaimed as well, similar to like the Harry Potter land that they have down there. So there's clearly a lot of appreciation and love for this movie. There is fans out there, but it is an interesting kind of a situation where it's 2 of the 3 highest grossing movies of all time, both Avatar movies. And yet, because there's no source material of a book, or maybe because the franchise is still relatively new, there hasn't been time to really develop the true fandom behind it. Although I do think, if the third one later this year does well as well, there's probably going to be a 4th one and a 5th one, and the land is still going to do well at Disney World. I think in 30 years' time, people are still going to have an appreciation for Avatar. And we're probably going to have TV shows and comic books and all that stuff. But right now, we're in this really kind of early point where we know it's a big deal. We know there is a fandom. There just hasn't been maybe a hardcore solidification of that fandom just yet. But who knows? Maybe I'll be a part of it in the future, because transitioning now more into my thoughts on the film, I'm a really big fan of these films. I like James Cameron as a filmmaker, and I think that while I understand some of the criticisms of the simplicity of the film, I think it still holds up at home, and it is a unique cinematic experience if you do get the chance to see it in the theaters. My thoughts on the film are relatively uncomplicated. I saw Avatar, I liked it, I didn't necessarily love it to become a massive fan or anything like that, and reading the lore and been a hardcore nerd about it, but I have a very positive, reputation towards it. I went to see the sequel. I like the sequel even better than the first movie, and I have a very simple opinion of it in that I thought the characters were somewhat interesting and the story was, solid, but it really is the world that you're so fascinated with and entering into that world. And especially seeing it at the time in 3D and then even in the re-release when I saw it in 3D, it really does up the movie even more so. There is no other movie experience that does 3D as well as the Avatar movies do. There really is a commitment to that. And then when you have that 3D experience, I think it helps you understand a little bit more the understanding of people wanting to kind of live in this world or the kind of depth that's going on here. But watching at home recently for a recent rewatch, what I learned more this time was kind of the subtle tricks that Cameron is so great at doing that makes it more than just an interesting world, that does make it an interesting movie. And that is how Cameron's kind of cinematic fundamentals add to the immersiveness of the world. There is a distinct style to the movie which is based in real life cameras and movies that aren't necessarily need to be there, that don't necessarily need to be there. We see this sometimes with animated movies or sometimes these motion capture movies, like I'm thinking of Robert Zemeckis' Beowulf. Because you're in a CGI environment, there technically doesn't need to be an actual camera there that follows the rules of the world. It is technically like an animated type of a movie. So you can move the camera anywhere you want. But sometimes when you do that, there's a sense of airiness or without gravity in the world that actually adds, I think, to the fakeness of it. So when you see a movie like Beowulf and the camera's spinning all over the place, you understand that it's kind of a heightened, stylized, almost video game type sequence. But with Avatar, because you're mixing live action elements with these CGI elements, Cameron's very careful at having camera movements that you would do in real life, while still adding to the immersive factor. So I'm thinking of when he first lands, subtle things where you have an unshaky Steadicam, you pull back a little bit, you see the line of soldiers and Jake Sully in the wheelchair there, and then he pans a little bit to get another shot of the sergeant introducing everyone, and then he pans a bit to the right and you see the aircraft hangar kind of drop down and we enter into the world. Where there's a very early sequence where Jake Sully's into the forest land and we're trying to understand this foreign place. And he touches a plant. And he keeps touching the plants, and you see Cameron kind of follow. And then as he touches one of the plants and it drops, the camera's already there, and you see one of the kind of hammerhead type rhino elephant creatures of Avatar right there in the middle of the frame. It is classic kind of guiding your eyes, hijacking your eyes. So you're following Jake kind of touch the little plants that disappear in a second, and then once one plant disappears, the camera's already there and he's told you where to look so that you have that same feeling of when that plant drops, you see the hammerhead shark figure guy, and you're like immediately emotionally connected to Jake Sully. You feel like you're in his shoes, you feel like you have that kind of point of view because of the way he moves the camera without it being too floaty, but still having kind of like a steady handheld style of photography. He is so great at making sure, almost like a painter's view of films, making sure he guides your eye exactly where he wants you to look at it. So that, in a way, by guiding your eye, it makes you emotionally connect to the characters, and it makes you feel more immersed in this world. It feels like you're seeing everything for the first time, like Jake is, like these kind of interesting plants and all this different world that's been created for this movie. So I think the story is a little bit traditional, and there's some kind of cardboard cutout type generic characters. But I think in certain movies where it can be cheesy or not well written, I would almost use this more so as stereotypical as a point of positive, because so much of the movie is built in trying to understand the world, and the appreciation is just flying through the world and checking out these different kind of creatures and hanging out with the Na'vi. I think it's okay to have these kind of more standard characters so that we just kind of immediately understand, okay, that's the kind of evil corporate guy, that's the evil military guy, these are, the scientists, these are the good guys, and we don't have to spend so much time developing complex characters. You're not necessarily going to get this necessarily from an Avatar movie, particularly within the first Avatar movie. And what's so great, I think, with Cameron is that he casts really well, so you understand immediately, Noram the scientist, okay, I know exactly who that guy is, and the actors do have some opportunity to kind of add some complexity to those characters, but I don't really want to expect a complex, independent drama in my Avatar movie. I kind of want to see this amazing world with these great visual effects, and then also, Cameron is still and we saw this with a couple of years ago, the most recent Avatar. I think he's still the best action filmmaker, maybe working today alongside Michael Bay. The same reason why he's able to hijack your cameras and force you and manipulate you to look at certain parts of the screen by moving his camera, he does the same thing with his action so that it's just incredibly clear. You know exactly where you are, you know what the stakes are, and it's so easy to get kind of emotionally invested because of his just innate ability to have a clear geographic space of where the danger is, of where people are, to increase surprise and drama within action scenes, so there actually is storytelling within the action scenes. When I think of someone like a Michael Bay, I think of chaos and intensity with the control of his craft. But when I think of Cameron, I think of simplicity, but just perfect simplicity, where there's no confusion whatsoever. It's easy to understand, and it's so engaging because he manipulates you where to look, because he's designed an incredible world to look at. You feel emotionally connected to these characters, even if they don't have a complex backstory, because he's so clear at giving you their intentions and their motivations and what they're looking at, that all he needs is a few shots to help you understand Jake Sully's POV, to help you emotionally connect with him and make you feel like you're actually there. And then you add in the fact of some of the technology of the 3D if you get to see it in the theaters, and it adds to this kind of immersive feeling. So I think Avatar is a great movie, a movie I really enjoy. I still think it's an incredibly immersive movie at home, but this time around really appreciated the clarity of Cameron's action filmmaking and how he's able to manipulate you to look at certain places within a frame through his camera work without you even realizing it. Very subtle, but a clear sign of a great visual master, and this is definitely a movie that was deserving to be made after the gold. But that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you comment below. Let me know your thoughts on Avatar. Am I correct in thinking that it's kind of got a weird cultural curio situation here where it's not as popular as maybe something like Harry Potter, but clearly it's got some fans? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. But that's about it. Until next time, stay tuned.